My name's Evan, and I've been RV camping for almost 10 years now. Not the kind of camping where you park in a packed campground with neon porch lights and satellite dishes everywhere. No, I'm talking about the quiet kind. The kind where it's just you, your rig, and the sound of 1,000 trees breathing in the dark. That was the point when I bought my first fifth wheel after my divorce. I wanted quiet, space, somewhere the noise couldn't find me. My ex used to say I was afraid of people, but really, I think I just wanted to remember what silence sounded like. That's what brought me and Mara out to the Smoky Mountains that fall. We'd only been dating a few months. She was the kind of woman who loved to read maps, who packed neatly labeled bins of trail snacks, and could fix a leak faster than I could find the duct tape. We both needed a break from the world, so when I suggested a remote site deep in the Smokies, one of those unofficial clearings you only find if you know how to follow unmarked Forest Service roads, she didn't hesitate. The drive out there was long, winding, and beautiful in that kind of haunted way only Appalachia can be. The forest pressed in tight on both sides of the narrow gravel road, trees twisted and thick with moss, their roots breaking through the rock like veins. It was mid-October, mist clung low in the hollows, and every turn looked like something out of an old folk tale you only half remember. We finally pulled off near a stream, just a sliver of space between the pines. No cell signal, no light but what we brought. It was perfect. That first night, the quiet felt sacred. We cooked over the fire, drank bourbon out of tin cups, and listened to the stream tumble over rocks. It was the kind of night where conversation feels slower, where every sound has weight. Around 11, the temperature dropped fast, and Mara suggested turning in. Inside the RV, the warmth wrapped around us. She fell asleep first, and I lay there listening to the wind. And that's when I heard it, just faintly, beneath the rustle of leaves. A voice. At first, I thought it was my imagination, the forest playing tricks, but it was there, a whisper, stretched thin across the valley. I couldn't make out words, just the tone, low, steady, like someone talking to themselves far away. I sat up, turned off the small fan, and held my breath. It faded. Then came again, different pitch this time, closer. I went outside barefoot, half embarrassed for reacting. The forest was black as pitch, except for the dull glow of the fire's last embers. The mist had thickened, rolling low through the trees like it had weight. The whispering stopped as soon as I stepped off the RV stairs. Just the stream, just wind. I waited a minute, then 5. Nothing. I told myself it was sound carrying strangely across the valley. A group of campers, maybe, or the water echoing in the hollow. Still, I slept poorly that night. The next morning, everything felt normal again. Birds chattered in the canopy, sunlight burned through the fog, and the air smelled like pine and wet earth. Mara made coffee on the little propane stove, laughing at me for how paranoid I'd been. "You heard the Smoky Mountain ghosts, didn't you?" she teased. I tried to laugh. "Sound carries weird out here. Probably just another camp across the ridge." But there were no tracks, no tire marks on the dirt road, and I'd swear to you now, we were the only ones there. We spent that day hiking, following an old trail that snaked behind the creek. The silence of that forest wasn't empty, it was alive. Every step sounded too loud. The leaves underfoot muffled our voices, and the deeper we went, the more it felt like the woods were holding their breath. At one point, Mara stopped, frowning. "Do you hear that?" she asked. It was faint, a rhythmic knock, 3 taps, then silence. I told her it was a woodpecker, but we both knew it came from somewhere lower, near the ground. When we looped back hours later, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been pacing us, always just far enough not to see. That night, the whispering returned. It came later, maybe 2 in the morning, louder this time. Still not clear, but closer. It was unmistakably human. A man's voice, soft, deliberate, like a prayer spoken through the trees. I woke Mara. She blinked, half asleep. "It's just the wind again, Iv." "No," I whispered. "Listen." We both held still. The RV's walls creaked in the cold, and then there it was again. Only now there were 2 voices, one low, one higher, maybe a woman's. They weren't talking to us, they were talking to each other. And the strangest part, each time the wind shifted, The direction of the sound changed. First, it came from the left, near the stream, then the right, then behind us, as if circling the RV in the dark. I stepped toward the window, trying to peer through the condensation. Nothing but shadows. The fire had gone out hours ago. The valley was swallowed by fog so thick, even the trees seemed to disappear into it. I grabbed the flashlight, hand shaking slightly. "I'm just going to check." "Evan, don't," she said quickly, sitting up. "I won't go far." The cold hit me like a slap when I stepped outside. I swept the beam across the clearing, grass, trees, mist. The whispering stopped. My breath fogged in front of me, and I realized how utterly still the forest was. Not even the creek sounded right. It was muffled, like someone had thrown a blanket over the world. Then a whisper cut through the quiet again, this time behind me. I spun around so fast I dropped the flashlight. The beam rolled, catching a glimpse of something pale, just for a second, behind the nearest tree. When I stepped closer, it was gone. I spent maybe a minute standing there, staring into the blackness, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Then I turned and went back inside. Mara hadn't moved. She was sitting straight up in bed, staring at the wall. I told her I didn't see anything, but she didn't look at me. Her eyes were fixed on the far corner near the kitchenette. "There was whispering," she said softly, "while you were outside." I froze. "What did it say?" She swallowed hard. "It said, 'We found you.'" The rest of that night passed in silence. Neither of us slept. When the first light broke over the ridge, I felt like I'd aged years. We tried to laugh it off over coffee again, but neither of us had much appetite. There was this heaviness between us, an understanding that something was wrong, but neither of us could name it without sounding crazy. Mara wanted to leave. I told her we'd pack up after breakfast. But part of me, some stubborn, prideful part, didn't want to be scared off by a trick of the woods. That was my mistake, because the third night was worse. And that's when I stopped thinking of the whispers as coming from the valley at all. By the time the third night came, the forest had changed. The air felt heavier somehow, colder, even though the forecast said otherwise. The sunlight never quite reached the ground that day. It just lingered somewhere above the canopy, caught in the mist that refused to burn away. Mara barely spoke. She sat by the fire, staring into it like she was trying to remember something. I tried to busy myself, tightening the hitch, checking the water tank, pretending like we were just another couple having an ordinary camping trip. But the forest had gone quiet again. Not peaceful. Hushed. No birds. No insects. Even the wind had died. Around dusk, I heard something new. A low humming sound, faint and rhythmic, like someone humming a tune with no words. It came and went, blending with the crackle of the fire. When I asked Mara if she heard it, she just shook her head. But I could tell she was lying. We turned in early. Neither of us wanted to be awake when the darkness fully settled. Still, lying there, I couldn't sleep. I listened to the little noises inside the RV, the creak of cooling metal, the soft whir of the fan, and tried to convince myself those were the only sounds in the world. Then, just past midnight, it began again. The whispers. At first, they were faint, threading through the wind like before. But this time, they weren't scattered around us, they were beneath us. I could feel the vibrations through the floor, faint and trembling, like someone speaking through the structure itself. Mara sat up. "You hear that?" I nodded, my throat dry. The whispers grew louder, clearer, moving along the baseboard, slipping between the thin seams of metal and insulation. I pressed my ear to the wall and heard it distinctly. A voice, male, calm, deliberate. "It's warmer here." They're still awake. Every hair on my body stood on end. I pulled back, staring at the wall like it could open its mouth and start speaking. Mara clutched my arm. "Is there someone outside?" I didn't answer. I didn't want to say what I was thinking. I grabbed the flashlight and opened the door in one motion. Cold air rushed in. The beam cut through fog so thick it looked solid, like milk poured over the forest. But there was nothing. No footsteps. No movement. Only the RV, sitting alone in that pale mist. I stepped out, bare feet sinking into the cold grass. I walked the perimeter slowly, flashlight trembling in my hand. The silence was complete. When I came back, Mara was standing at the door, pale as paper. "What?" I whispered. She pointed to the wall near the kitchenette. "It's still talking." I stepped closer, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingers. The sound was clearer now, rising from deep inside the wall, two distinct voices whispering back and forth. They moved again. They know now. The voices were inside the RV. I ripped open the lower cabinet, the one that led to the wiring and insulation panels. Nothing but pipes and wires. The whispering stopped immediately. I turned to Mara. She was shaking, eyes wet. "We have to go." I wanted to agree. God, I did. But it was nearly 2 a.m, and the road back out was narrow, unmarked, full of switchbacks. Driving that in dense fog could kill us as surely as whatever this was. So I told her we'd leave at dawn. She didn't speak after that, just crawled into bed, back to the wall, eyes open. I sat in the small dinette booth, flashlight still in hand, trying to make sense of any of it. And then, sometime around 3 a.m., I heard the whispering again, but not from the walls. This time it came from the vent above me, a dry, soft exhale, then a word. Evan. My name. I froze. The sound came again, softer now, drawn out like a sigh. Evan. The air vent shuddered slightly as if something had brushed against it from the inside. I don't remember standing or how the flashlight ended up rolling across the floor. I just remember Mara screaming, high, raw, terrified. The whisper had moved. It was behind her now, in the thin paneling just inches from her head. "Get out!" I shouted. I yanked the door open and we bolted into the fog barefoot, not even grabbing our coats. Outside, the air was so cold it burned. The forest was utterly still, our breath clouds twisting together like smoke. From inside the RV, we could still hear it, the voices low, rhythmic, overlapping each other, whispering words we couldn't understand. And then, as we stood there in the dark, something started knocking from inside the walls. 3 sharp raps, then silence, then again. Knock, knock, knock. Mara started crying. I wanted to run, but where? The road was invisible in the fog. The forest pressed in tight, swallowing the beam of the flashlight. So we waited. The knocking stopped after a minute. Then came one final whisper, louder than before, as if it was right against the door. "Don't leave yet." That was it. I grabbed Mara's hand and we ran. Down the dirt road, through the fog, stumbling over roots and rocks. My lungs burned, but I didn't care. I just kept running until the mist started to thin and the first hint of dawn broke through the trees. We didn't stop until we reached a ranger station miles down the mountain. When the ranger came out, we must have looked insane, barefoot, shivering, covered in dirt. I tried to explain what happened, but the words sounded ridiculous even as I said them. Voices in the walls, whispering names. He nodded slowly, like he'd heard it all before, said something about sound traveling strange in these hollers, and offered to drive us back up once the fog lifted to check on the RV. Mara refused. She didn't want to go near it again. I went with him alone. When we reached the clearing hours later, the sun was up and the forest looked almost peaceful again. The RV door was wide open. Inside, it was just as we'd left it, except for one thing. Every vent cover, every wall panel I could reach had been pulled loose. Not torn off, unscrewed, clean and careful, like someone had taken their time. I remember the ranger looking around, rubbing the back of his neck. "Could have been animals," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. We hauled the RV down the mountain that afternoon. Mara didn't say a word the entire way home. That night, when I finally sat down alone, I kept thinking about something, those whispers. They'd never sounded angry, never threatening, just curious, observing. But the last thing I heard before we ran, the words I tried to forget, didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like an invitation. Don't leave yet. And here's the part I've never told anyone else. When I got home and went to clean the RV a few days later, I found something in the wall, wedged deep behind the panel near the vent where I'd heard my name. A small folded piece of paper, no handwriting, no marks, just the faint smell of pine. And when I unfolded it, there was only one word printed inside, pressed so faintly it looked almost rubbed out. Stay. For weeks after that trip, I kept waking up at night to silence. Not noise. Silence. That kind of heavy quiet that presses against your chest makes you hold your breath without knowing why. Mara and I didn't last long after that. She said the woods had changed something in me, that I wasn't the same person when I got back. Maybe she was right. I stopped talking about the trip altogether, stopped camping, stopped driving the RV. It sat in my yard for months, parked beneath an oak tree, collecting dust and pollen. But every night I'd catch myself listening for a sound that wasn't there, a whisper that never came back. Still, silence can be loud once you've heard something like that. I tried to move on. Sold the RV that winter, told myself it was just wind or sound bouncing through metal or my own guilt trying to take shape. But the mind doesn't forget what it's afraid to name. It was early spring when the man who bought the RV called me. He said he loved it, everything worked great, but he had one question. "Did you ever get a weird echo through the vents?" he asked. "Like the insulation's loose or something?" My stomach went cold. I told him no. He thanked me, said it was probably nothing. But that night, I couldn't sleep again. I kept thinking about the paper I'd found, how the letters on it were so faint, almost erased, like whoever or whatever had written it didn't want to leave proof. Stay. It wasn't just a word, it was a request, maybe even a command. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how close I'd come to obeying it. If Mara hadn't screamed that night, if I'd taken one more minute to rationalize, to search, to explain it away, we might have stayed. And I don't know what would have happened after that. See, here's the thing people don't tell you about the wilderness. It doesn't need to chase you. It just needs to wait. There's something about being surrounded by so much stillness, so much distance from anything human, that starts peeling layers off your mind. You stop trusting what you see and start doubting what you don't. You think the fear is coming from outside when really it's rising up from underneath your own skin. And that's what the Smokies taught me. Not all dangers in the woods are alive. Some are echoes. Echoes of guilt, of loneliness, of the things you haven't faced yet. The whispers didn't start when we got there. They started when we stopped pretending we weren't broken people trying to find peace in a place that mirrors your silence back at you. Months passed. I went back to my job, tried to bury it all. But one night, driving home from work, I saw a line of RVs heading up toward the mountains. Families, couples, retirees, all chasing that same quiet I once loved. And I thought about what happens when you finally find that quiet. When the world goes so still that it starts whispering your name back to you. Because here's the truth no one tells you about RV camping off-grid. You go out there thinking you're escaping the noise. But sometimes the noise is all that keeps you grounded. Without it, you start to hear other things. A few months later, I finally worked up the nerve to visit the Smokies again. Not that same hollow, but close enough that I could still feel the weight of the air. I parked my truck by a ranger outpost, no camping gear, no plans. Just wanted to see if the place would still make my chest tighten. The ranger on duty was an older man, white beard, soft eyes. I asked him, half joking, if folks ever reported strange sounds around the valleys. He gave me this long look. "Depends what kind of sounds," he said. "Voices," I said, "like whispering, traveling through the fog." He scratched his chin. "Yeah, we get a few of those reports every year. Always at night, always foggy." Then he leaned in a little. "Thing is, we've checked. Every time. No camps nearby, no hikers, no animals. But sound carries weird down here. There's caves, old mines, sinkholes. Sometimes even air pressure shifts can bounce a whisper for half a mile." He said it like science, but his tone didn't match the words. I asked him if anyone ever found where it came from. He just smiled faintly. "Son, around here, some things ain't meant to be found." I drove home that evening through a low mist that looked too familiar. For a moment, I almost rolled down the window just to listen, but I didn't, because here's what I finally understood. The danger wasn't the whispering. It was the curiosity, that need to know, to find the source. That's what gets people in trouble out there, not monsters, not ghosts, not even strangers. It's the simple refusal to leave things alone. Every missing person poster pinned to a ranger station corkboard has the same story underneath. They heard something strange. They went to check. They didn't come back. And the mountains, they never tell you what they keep. Sometimes I wonder what the Smokies would have said if I'd stayed, if I'd pressed my ear to the wall just a little longer, if I'd answered back. I'll never know. But some nights when I'm driving through the back roads of Tennessee, windows down, the engine humming like a heartbeat, I swear I can feel that same quiet again, the kind that comes before a whisper. And I remember what the forest taught me, that silence is never empty. It's waiting. That's the lesson I try to give anyone who camps deep in the wild. Trust the noise. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, if the stillness feels too complete, it probably is. Because when the woods go quiet, it's not always peace. Sometimes it's attention, and once it notices you, you'll never hear silence the same way again. It's been years since that night, and I still camp sometimes, but never alone, never that deep. I like being around people now. The laughter, the chatter, the music bleeding from someone's speaker 2 campsites down. It's not that I'm afraid of the quiet anymore, it's that I respect it. Because when the world gets too still, when even the air holds its breath, it's not just the forest listening. It's everything you've ever buried trying to speak back. And maybe, just maybe, the whispers in those Smoky Mountains weren't calling to me at all. Maybe they were calling through me. I still remember that last word. The one on the paper I found behind the vent. Stay. Sometimes I think about how close I came to obeying it, and I wonder how many others did. Maybe that's why the whispers always sound different, because they're not calling out to you. They're echoing from the ones who never left. So if you ever find yourself parked deep in the Smokies, in that kind of quiet that makes your heartbeat sound too loud, and you start to hear a voice that doesn't belong to the wind, don't answer. Don't look for it. Just turn the key. Drive toward the noise. Because in those mountains, the quiet isn't peace. It's a mouth waiting to open. And once it does, it never really closes. I don't know why I kept driving that night. The smarter thing would have been to pull over, wait till morning, and figure it out then. But something about the darkness in the Appalachians, it doesn't feel like the rest of the country. The trees don't line the road. They lean into it, like they're listening. My name's Evan, 45 years old, and I've been on the road for most of the past year. After what happened last spring, after she was gone, home started feeling more like a waiting room than a place to live. So I sold the house, packed what I could into my old 74 Volkswagen Westphalia, and told myself I'd find peace somewhere under the trees. Peace. That's what I thought I was chasing. But the farther you get into these mountains, the quieter it gets. And when it's that quiet, you start hearing the wrong things. Things you think are footsteps, breaths, someone whispering your name just outside the van door. That night, the road twisted endlessly through the mist. The map on my phone had frozen an hour ago, no signal anywhere, so I was following an old GPS route I'd found posted on an RV forum from years back. Someone mentioning a hidden campground west of Cherokee National Forest. They said it was quiet, remote, good for a night alone. The thread was dated 2011. Nobody had replied. Still, the coordinates were burned into my head. I told myself it'd be an adventure. When I finally saw the dirt turnoff, it was barely visible between 2 old trees. My headlights caught a small wooden sign nailed crookedly to one, the paint almost erased by time, but I could still make out the faint letters, Little Creek Campground. There was no park office, no gate, no ranger post, just a gravel path sloping down into darkness. I shifted into first gear and started down, tires crunching loose stone, the mist thickening till it felt like smoke. After a mile or so, I reached an open clearing ringed by pines. There were 4 other campers parked there, older models, maybe from the 70s or 80s, boxy shapes half sunk into the soil. A faint orange light glowed in one RV window. I remember thinking how normal it looked, like a place that had been alive once and was waiting for people to return. I parked near the edge of the clearing, shut off the engine, and let the silence settle. The only sound was the slow ticking of the Westphalia cooling down. That first night, I made a small fire and cooked some beans on my camping stove. The air smelled damp, metallic like river rock after rain. Somewhere deep in the trees, a whip-poor-will called, the kind of lonely sound that feels like it's repeating a question you can't answer. I didn't see anyone that night. The lights in the other RVs stayed on, soft and unmoving, like no one inside needed to move again. I remember glancing out the window before falling asleep. My Westphalia was facing east toward the tree line. When I woke up the next morning, it was facing north. At first, I thought I'd misremembered. The fog was thick again, the trees almost erased by it, so maybe I was disoriented. I checked the tire tracks, though. There were fresh imprints in the damp earth. My van had clearly turned in the night. I laughed it off. Maybe I'd parked crooked and the ground had shifted. Maybe it was the slope. I told myself anything that sounded rational because the alternative was absurd. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. I got out, walked around, stretched my legs. The campground was eerily still. The other RVs hadn't moved an inch. Curtains drawn, no smoke from their chimneys, no footprints in the mud. I waved once, just in case. No response. When I passed one of them, an old Airstream with rust blooming along the seams, I noticed a cup sitting on the picnic table outside. Coffee, or what used to be. The liquid inside had gone black and still, but the ring on the table looked fresh, like someone had just set it down that morning. That's when the smell hit me. Faint, like singed hair or burnt dust. It wasn't coming from the fire pit or my van. It was coming from the woods behind the Airstream. I almost called out. Then I remembered how the air had sounded the night before, like it was listening. So I kept quiet. The day went on uneventfully. I read for a while, walked down toward what must have been the old creek bed. Dry now, just a shallow gash in the earth filled with fog. I found broken beer bottles, a rusted chair, and a torn flannel shirt draped over a branch. Everything looked recently abandoned, as if someone had left in the middle of something. That night, I parked the van the same way again, facing east toward the trees, and told myself I'd sleep light, just in case. The forest was noisier that night. I could hear something walking, slow, deliberate steps that crunched once, then paused, then again. Too heavy for a raccoon, too light for a deer. At one point, there was a faint metallic sound, like someone brushing against the van's door handle. I sat up, heart pounding, eyes fixed on the sliding door. Nothing. The footsteps stopped, but the silence that followed was worse. I could hear my pulse in my ears. I told myself to open the curtains, to look. But I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe because part of me didn't want to see what might be there, or what might not. When I finally drifted off near dawn, the mist was crawling low across the clearing again, so thick I could barely see the ground. When I woke the next morning, my Westphalia was facing west. That's when fear became something heavier. Not just unease, but awareness. Someone was moving my van. Someone was touching it while I slept. I walked around, looked for footprints, but the ground was covered in soft pine needles that hid everything. The other RVs were still in place. Same lights, same stillness. I went up to the Airstream again, this time knocking on the door. Once, twice. The sound was swallowed by the fog. Then, very faintly from inside, I heard movement. Not footsteps, more like something shifting its weight slowly, carefully. "Hello?" I said. No answer. I waited a few seconds, then turned to leave. As I did, I caught something out of the corner of my eye through the window. Not a face, not really, just a shape behind the curtain, too tall for the space it was in. That was enough. I went back to my van and decided I'd leave after breakfast. Maybe find a real campground, one with people, with cell service. But when I tried to start the engine, it only clicked. The battery was fine, but the ignition refused to catch. Then I noticed the driver's side mirror. It was angled upward toward the treetops, like someone had adjusted it deliberately, not to see the road, but to watch the forest. That's when I realized this wasn't random. Whatever was happening here was meant for me. That thought felt absurd the moment it crossed my mind. narcissistic even. But that's what fear does. It personalizes. It makes you believe the world has narrowed its focus to you alone. And maybe it had. Because that night, as the sun bled out behind the ridges and the last light faded from the sky, I saw something that turned the unease into something I can't quite name. Across the clearing, the lights in the other RVs flickered. Not out, on, all at once, as if someone had been waiting for darkness to fall before revealing they'd been awake the whole time. I remember standing there in the doorway of my van, cold air slipping through the trees, my breath fogging the glass, watching as the silhouettes behind those curtains began to move. Slow, mechanical, almost in unison. They moved in the kind of rhythm that doesn't belong to people anymore. Too slow, too synchronized. Each shadow behind the curtains shifted a few inches, then stilled, as if waiting for me to react, testing how long I'd stand there before pretending I hadn't seen it. The air was thick with damp pine and that faint burnt smell again. It crawled down the back of my throat until I could taste it, bitter, electric, like the ozone before a storm. For a few seconds, I told myself it was just headlights or reflections, or maybe my own exhaustion twisting things. I hadn't slept well in days. I'd been running from the weight of everything, driving into the wilderness like that would fix anything. But denial only lasts until something moves the wrong way. Because when the light in the airstream flickered again, the curtain parted, just an inch, and something white flashed behind it. Not a face, just the suggestion of one. Still, waiting. I ducked back into my van, slammed the sliding door, and locked it. My hands shook as I twisted the key in the ignition again. Nothing. The same dry click. The silence outside was unbearable. It wasn't the kind that feels peaceful. It was listening. I could feel it pressing against the thin metal walls of the Westphalia, heavy and alive. Every noise I made seemed too loud. The rasp of my breath, the tremor of the keys as I fumbled them, the heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then, from somewhere beyond the van, a knock. 3 slow taps against the back panel. I froze. It wasn't hard enough to dent the metal, but it was deliberate. It came from the rear, the part that had been facing the forest that first night. Another knock, same rhythm. I whispered her name before I even realized it. Anna. It slipped out like a reflex, the way a wounded animal might call for help. It knows, won't come. Anna had loved this van. She'd picked it out from a classifieds ad in Knoxville, spent weeks sanding and painting it, insisting on that mustard yellow even when I hated it. Said it made the road feel like sunshine. She was the reason I'd learned to camp in the first place, the reason I'd lost her too. And now, standing there in that van with something knocking from the outside, or maybe from memory itself, I didn't know which version of fear I was feeling, the one in front of me or the one I'd been carrying all year. The knocks stopped. I waited, counted to 30, then 40, then 100. When I finally looked up, I saw that all the other RV lights were still on, but the figures behind them were gone, just empty windows glowing faintly in the fog. I remember whispering to myself, "Get out, Evan. Just get out." So I did the stupidest thing possible. I grabbed the flashlight from the glove box, cracked the door open, and stepped into the clearing. The fog swallowed everything within 6 feet. The beam from the flashlight looked more like a solid column than light, dense, useless. The campground felt wrong, like the air pressure had dropped or gravity had shifted. My own footsteps sounded muted, disconnected from the rhythm of my body. I tried to call out again, "Hello," but the word came out strangled, half swallowed by the mist. That's when I saw the first footprint. It was fresh, pressed deep into the wet earth right outside my van. Barefoot. Toes splayed wide like something heavy had leaned its weight into the step. I followed the prints toward the airstream, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't stop myself. The human brain does this strange thing when it's terrified. It moves toward the source of fear, not away from it. Like a moth circling a flame it knows will kill it. The closer I got, the colder the air became. I could see my breath now, not from the temperature, but from something else, like the oxygen had thinned. When I reached the airstream, the door was slightly ajar. Inside, the air smelled like rust and mildew and something faintly chemical. Old propane, maybe, or decay. The flashlight beam swept over the table, the cup of coffee, a torn map, and pinned to the wall with a rusted knife, a photograph. It was a Polaroid, the edges curled with age, and in it I saw my own van, parked exactly where it was now. The photo was dated October 2011. That was the year the forum post had been made. My chest tightened. I looked closer. There was a figure standing next to the van in the photo, blurry, almost erased by light. But the shape, the posture, it looked familiar. I stepped back, almost tripping over the threshold. The fog outside seemed thicker now, the glow from the other campers pulsing faintly like they were breathing in sync. That's when I heard it again, the knocking. But this time it wasn't from my van. It was from inside the airstream. Louder, closer. The walls shuddered with each hit. I ran. The flashlight slipped from my hand and rolled into the fog. I didn't stop to grab it. I just ran back to the Westphalia, heart hammering so hard I thought I might black out. When I yanked open the door and threw myself inside, I didn't bother locking it. I just curled up behind the driver's seat, breathing in gasps. The knocking outside didn't follow me, but I could hear something else, a faint mechanical whine, like an engine turning over. I lifted my head just enough to look out the windshield. Across the clearing, one of the old RVs, the smallest one, a beige Winnebago with its windows blacked out, had started itself. Its headlights flicked on, piercing through the fog. The beam swept across my van for a second, and I swear, there was a figure sitting in the driver's seat, face hidden by glare, motionless. The headlights turned off. The sound stopped. Silence again. And then, as if to mock me, my van's ignition clicked, once, twice, and then roared to life. I hadn't touched the key. The engine idled smoothly, steady as if nothing had ever been wrong. The dash lights glowed soft orange, the same color as the other's windows. I didn't think. I just threw it into reverse, spun the tires in the mud, and tore up the gravel road toward the main trail. The fog chased me all the way out, or maybe I was dragging it behind me. I remember glancing in the mirror once, and for a split second, I could still see the glow of the campground lights through the trees. 4 orange squares, flickering in the dark. Then they were gone. I drove until sunrise, before pulling over on the shoulder of a paved road, miles from anywhere. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. When I finally looked around, the van was filthy. Pine needles, mud, and something smeared across the rear window. It looked like a handprint. But when I touched it, it was dry, not mud, not dirt, something older. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have, because when I woke, the sun was high and everything looked painfully normal. Birds chirping, distant traffic, civilization. I turned on my phone, full signal. I typed the name of the place, Little Creek Campground. Nothing, no listings, no coordinates, no mentions anywhere, not even in the old forum archive. The post I'd seen the night before was gone, almost like it had never been there. I kept driving that day, trying to tell myself it didn't matter, that it was all exhaustion, grief, a trick of the mind. But some nights, when I park the van and try to sleep, I swear I can still hear it, that slow, deliberate knock on the back panel. And sometimes when I wake up, the van's facing a different direction. It's been 3 weeks since that night, 3 weeks since the fog swallowed Little Creek Campground and left me here, back among people, roads, and noise. I've been trying to tell myself it was just a place, just a stretch of land I stumbled onto where something strange happened. But that's not really true, is it? Because the place isn't what stays with me. It's the silence that followed, the kind that seeps into your bones after fear should have ended. I've parked the Westphalia now in a small RV park near Asheville, a real one, with check-in slips and Wi-Fi and kids riding their bikes between spaces. It's the kind of place where people wave to you without realizing they're saving you from yourself. Every morning, I wake to the same sound, a neighbor's dog barking, the rattle of coffee mugs, the hum of life. But each night, when the campground quiets down and the lanterns go out, I can't help looking out my window to make sure the van's still facing the same direction. Sometimes I don't check. Sometimes I can't. The logical part of me knows what it would say if I told anyone. It would use words like hallucination, sleep deprivation, complicated grief. Maybe they'd be right. Maybe after Anna's accident, I just drove too far into the wilderness looking for her ghost. Not literally. I never believed in ghosts, but in the way you look for someone in the things they loved, hoping the world will echo them back to you. She died on a camping trip in West Virginia, 2 hours north of where I found Little Creek. A storm rolled in fast. She went to check the tarp on our old tent while I was still inside the van, arguing with the map, trying to prove her wrong about the direction we'd taken. By the time I ran out, she was already gone. Drowned in a flash flood that came and went in less than 5 minutes. For months after, I couldn't go near the woods. Then one night, I found myself scrolling those old RV forums, reading posts from people who'd written about their special hidden spots, the places they swore nobody else knew. That's how I found the coordinates. That's how I convinced myself that if I could just get back to some untouched piece of land, I might finally understand what had happened. Maybe that's all Little Creek was, a map made by guilt. But there's still something I can't explain. After I left the mountains, I took the van into a shop to have it looked at. Wiring, starter, ignition. The mechanic popped the hood, stared for a while, and then asked me where I'd had the work done. I told him I hadn't. He said someone had replaced the ignition coil and rewired part of the starter. Recent work, clean, careful. I didn't know what to say. That night, I went back to the van, pulled open the glove box, and saw something wedged in the seam beneath the registration papers. A Polaroid, same faded edges, same handwriting on the back. It just said, October 2024. No image, overexposed, white as bone. I sat there for hours, engine off, the dark pressing in from every window, listening to the metal tick as it cooled. And I realized something I'd been avoiding since that night. The fear didn't start at Little Creek. It followed me there. The forest just gave it shape. Because grief is a kind of geography, isn't it? It has its own trails, its own dead ends. You can get lost in it so long that when you finally look up, you're somewhere that doesn't exist, a place built out of what you can't let go. When I think back to those 4 RVs, I can still see them clearly. The glow through their curtains, the shapes inside that didn't move, like people. But I wonder now if they were ever meant to be frightening. Maybe they weren't warning me. Maybe they were mirroring me. 4 campers, 4 directions, east, north, west, south. Each night the van turned as if the earth itself was trying to reorient me, to show me something I'd refused to see. The night before Anna died, we argued about that exact thing, directions. She said I never listened, said I was always trying to control where we were going instead of just being there. When the van turned east the first time, I told myself it was a trick of the slope. When it faced west, I said it was the wind. But maybe it wasn't moving toward anything. Maybe it was pointing me back to where she was, back to where I lost her, back to where I still was, even now. Sometimes I catch myself wondering if Little Creek was ever real. I've searched the maps again, topographical, digital, even the old paper kind. Nothing. Not a single reference to a campground by that name anywhere in Tennessee or North Carolina. But a few days ago, when I stopped for gas near Boone, I asked the clerk if he'd ever heard of it. He looked at me strangely and said, "Little Creek? You mean the old mining road that washed out years ago?" He said there used to be cabins out that way before the floods. Nothing left now, just a clearing and a dry riverbed. I asked when that was. He said, about 2011, maybe 2012. You can't even get up there anymore. I didn't tell him I already had. Last night it happened again. I was asleep at the RV park, lights on, neighbors close, the safety of human noise all around. And then knock. 3 slow taps on the back panel. I didn't move. I just lay there, eyes open, heart thudding, counting the seconds. Then I heard it again, softer this time, not on metal, but on glass, the window above my head. I turned my face just enough to see my reflection in the dark, pale, half awake, hollow-eyed, and behind it the faint outline of a handprint sliding slowly downward. When I finally gathered the courage to look out the next morning, there was nothing there. But the van was facing north. Sometimes when I drive now, I catch a glimpse of something in the mirrors, a shape in the fog behind me or a glow between the trees, never close enough to see clearly. And every time I stop somewhere new, I tell myself it's the last night I'll sleep in this van, that I'll sell it, move on, settle somewhere permanent. But I never do. Because deep down, I think I'm still waiting for her to tell me which direction to face. And maybe that's what the campground really was. Not a place that existed in the world, but the point where the living and the lost stop being able to tell each other apart. Where you park the van, close your eyes, and listen to the earth breathing beneath you, hoping it will whisper back the thing you've been too afraid to hear. That she's gone, that you're still here, that it's time to drive on, even if the road ahead doesn't appear on any map. I still don't know if what happened that night was real. Sometimes I tell myself it was exhaustion, isolation, maybe the fog that plays tricks with sound in the Appalachian foothills. But there's a moment I can't shake. The way my reflection looked at me the next morning, how it blinked just a fraction too late. My name's Eli Wren, 43 years old, born and raised in North Carolina. I'd been on the road for months, living out of my old Volkswagen Westphalia, chasing quiet places where the air still felt honest. I wasn't running from anyone, not exactly. More like I was trying to outdrive the weight of a divorce that had hollowed me out from the inside. RV camping had become my way to breathe again, to sleep under new skies and wake up somewhere that didn't remind me of what I'd lost. That's how I ended up at Stillwater Ridge RV Park, a small family-run place just outside of Ellijay, Georgia, a patch of gravel lots, pine trees, and the faint hum of cicadas that never seem to end, the kind of place where the owner knows your name after one conversation. When I checked in, the woman behind the counter, Marla, gave me a long, assessing look, like she'd seen 100 men arrive pretending they were on vacation when they were really just escaping something. "Lot 12's open," she said, handing me the key for the shower block. Then she paused. "Just don't take the trail behind the park, especially after dark." I laughed a little, thought it was local humor, some small-town superstition meant to spook tourists. She didn't laugh back. The trail started just behind the last row of campsites, a narrow dirt path vanishing between two hickories barely wide enough for a single hiker. There was no sign, no marker, just a dark slash through the trees. I saw it that first evening while walking my dog, June, a shepherd mix with more loyalty than I deserved. She stopped at the mouth of that path and growled low, tail tucked. I pulled the leash gently, but she wouldn't move an inch closer. That should have been my first clue. The next few days were calm. Quiet mornings, making coffee by the van, evenings with a campfire, other RVers scattered across the park. There was a retired couple from Florida, a young family with a pop-up trailer, and one guy named Harper who lived in a rusty Airstream, said he'd been there off and on since the pandemic. He was the one who told me the story. Said the trail used to lead to a logging camp decades ago, before the land was sold and turned into the RV park. But a few locals vanished out there. Hunters, hikers, even a county surveyor. Folks said they'd find the man's truck still running by the lot entrance, door open, coffee still hot. No one found him. Harper leaned close as he talked, voice low and graveled. "They say the woods don't like to let go of people who don't want to be found." That line stuck in my head longer than I wanted it to. The night it happened, the air felt strange, humid, heavy, like a storm that couldn't make up its mind. The sky had that gray, swollen look of dusk that never really ends in the Appalachians. I'd been drinking, not much, just enough to make my thoughts louder than the crickets. I sat in my van staring at my reflection in the windshield, the kind of stare where you stop recognizing yourself. I told myself I needed to clear my head, so I grabbed my flashlight, whistled for June, and walked out toward the edge of the park. She wouldn't follow. She stood in the gravel, ears back, trembling, whining low. When I tugged the leash, she yanked free, bolted under the van, and wouldn't come out. Something in me should have turned around right then. But grief has a way of pushing you toward the wrong kind of silence. I told myself I just wanted to see where the path went. Just a short walk. The beam of my flashlight trembled as I stepped onto the trail. The air changed almost instantly, cooler, denser, with a smell like wet stone and iron. The noise of the campground faded behind me, replaced by the steady rhythm of cicadas and the soft crunch of my boots. The deeper I went, the more the world seemed to close in, branches overlapping like ribs, shadows thick enough to swallow the beam of my light. I started to notice little things, the way the dirt underfoot seemed too soft, like it had been freshly turned, the faint metallic taste in the air, a sound like distant water, though there was no creek nearby. After maybe 10 minutes, I saw it, a clearing ahead, faintly lit by moonlight filtering through a break in the canopy. I stepped into it and froze. There were tracks in the dirt, not animal tracks, bare feet, deep impressions pointing both directions, in and out, but none of them looked quite right. The spacing was off, the toes splayed too wide, the arches too long. I crouched down, running the flashlight along them. And then I realized something worse. My own boot prints weren't visible behind me anymore. The trail I'd come down had somehow smoothed over, like the earth had swallowed it back. The wind shifted, and I swear I heard something. Not quite a whisper, not quite a breath, just a tremor in the air that brushed the back of my neck like static. My chest tightened. Every instinct screamed to turn around, but my body wouldn't move. It felt like the woods were waiting for me to say something. Then, from somewhere behind the trees, a single knock echoed. Sharp. Hollow, like wood hitting wood. I spun the flashlight toward the sound, nothing but black trunks and tangled roots. Another knock came, closer, then another. 3. Steady, deliberate. I started backing away, heart hammering. The forest felt alive, pressing in from all sides. My flashlight flickered once, twice, then went out completely. For a moment there was nothing but the sound of my own breathing. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, careful, matching my retreat, step for step. I whispered June's name, a pathetic reflex, knowing she was back at the van. The air smelled strange again, that same iron tang, stronger now, almost sweet. I stumbled backward, hands out, trying to find the path. I could feel the ground slope downward, uneven. My shoulder brushed something, bark, rough and damp, and I turned, half running, half falling in the dark. I didn't look back. Couldn't. When the trees finally thinned, I burst into the open gravel lot behind the park, gasping, lightheaded. The night was still. The cicadas had gone silent. Every RV light was off. It was 2:13 a.m. according to my watch, though I could have sworn I'd only been gone 20 minutes. I didn't sleep. I sat outside my van until sunrise, watching the fog roll off the hills. When the first light hit the windshield, I caught my reflection again. Hollow eyes, pale skin, beard shadow. And for a second, it didn't move when I did. Just a split-second lag, like bad video buffering. I blinked hard, rubbed my face, laughed it off. Told myself it was exhaustion, nothing more. But June wouldn't come near me. She stayed under the van, growling low whenever I stepped close. I reached out my hand. She bared her teeth, tail stiff. That dog had slept beside me through thunderstorms and coyotes. She'd never once flinched from me before. That's when the unease turned to dread. I tried to talk to Harper later that morning, but his airstream was gone. No note, no goodbye. Just tire tracks in the dew and a cold fire pit. When I asked Marla about it, she looked at me strange, said no one named Harper had checked in for months. That's when I stopped asking questions. But something about the air that day, the way it carried my own echo a beat too late, made me realize I hadn't really come back alone. By late morning, the campground had taken on that strange hush that comes after something unspoken happens. Kids who'd been laughing by the picnic tables the day before now whispered instead. The air felt stale, almost metallic, like rain that never arrived. I tried to go through the motions, washed my dishes, checked the van's oil, made coffee, but every movement felt out of sync, like I was watching myself from somewhere half a second behind. When I walked past the bathhouse, I caught my reflection again in the long pane of the vending machine glass. The same faint delay. Blink, then reflection blink. I stepped closer, tilted my head. The reflection didn't tilt, not right away. I jerked back, heart hammering. A kid nearby was staring. Maybe he saw me flinch, maybe not, and I forced a smile like everything was fine. But inside, something was unraveling. There are things the human brain will do to protect you, to keep you believing in order, logic, reason. That morning, mine was losing the fight. I spent most of the afternoon trying to convince myself I was just tired. That's all. Stress, bad sleep, caffeine, maybe even dehydration. I'd seen strange things before on the road, tricks of light, dreams that clung to waking hours, but every time I looked at the van window or the mirror above the sink, I felt the same unease. Like something was wearing my face but hadn't quite figured out how to use it. By dusk, I couldn't take the waiting anymore. I needed to prove it was nothing, so I decided to go back to the trail. Not far, just far enough to see it in daylight, to remind myself it was just a path through the woods. June refused to follow again. She stood by the van door, hackles raised, letting out a low growl I'd never heard before. Her pupils were huge, her whole body trembling. I crouched to pet her, but she backed away, teeth bared, a sound like pure panic coming out of her throat. I felt something in my chest twist. I left her there, hating myself for it. The trail in daylight looked different, smaller somehow, less threatening, more like any other stretch of Appalachian dirt. The trees bowed low, sunlight trickling through the branches, Stillwater Ridge spread behind me, the faint hum of RV generators in the distance, normal life carrying on. But when I stepped past the tree line, the air shifted again, cooler, thinner, too quiet, no birds, no insects, just silence that pressed against my eardrums. I walked maybe 50 yards in before I stopped. The ground looked untouched. No footprints, no signs of the clearing I remembered. I turned slowly, trying to line up my direction, and realized something odd. I couldn't see the campground anymore. It should have been visible through the trees, but all I saw were endless trunks and a dull gray light filtering through. That's when I heard it. A faint sound behind me. Not a footstep. Not breathing. More like shuffling. I spun, flashlight in hand, even though it was still daylight. The forest stood perfectly still. But something about the light had changed. Brighter in the distance, darker where I stood. Like the sun was moving faster than it should. I felt that instinct again. The one that says, don't stay another second. I turned to leave, except the path behind me wasn't there anymore. It's strange. The moment you realize you're lost in a place that shouldn't be able to hide you. The panic doesn't come all at once. It drips in, first as confusion, then denial, then something heavier, a quiet dread that settles in your stomach and doesn't leave. I took slow breaths, tried to retrace my steps, but the forest kept shifting in small ways. A fallen branch that hadn't been there. A stump that seemed to move closer every time I blinked. The silence was so thick it felt alive, like sound itself was being swallowed. Then came that smell again, iron and damp earth, and underneath it something new, something sweet, almost floral. The air around me shimmered slightly as if with heat, and just at the edge of my hearing, a voice, low, quiet, almost gentle, said my name. Eli. I froze. It wasn't loud, it wasn't even distinct, but it was mine. My own voice, calling out from somewhere deeper in the woods. That's when my flashlight clicked on by itself, a faint blue glow cutting across the trees, though I could have sworn I'd left it off. The beam pointed straight ahead into the thicket, and through the tangle of branches I saw movement, a figure standing still just beyond clear sight, tall, lean, with its head tilted like it was listening. It took me a full minute to realize what I was looking at. It was me. Or something that looked like me. The clothes were the same, the stance, but the skin looked wrong, like the light didn't sit on it right. I could see the faint shimmer of it, like water seen through glass. And its eyes, they caught the light but didn't reflect it. Eli, it said again, my voice, but heavier, slowed down as if spoken underwater. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping on a root. The thing tilted its head, mirroring me with that slight delay, like a mirror that's just a beat behind. That's when the smell grew stronger, sharp, metallic, almost unbearable. The air throbbed with it. My skin prickled, and the thing started to move forward. Not walking, gliding, smooth, each step dissolving slightly at the edges. I turned and ran. I don't remember how long I ran, only that the forest wouldn't let me leave. Every direction looked the same hickories, the same slope, the same feeling that I was circling something invisible. My chest burned. My throat was raw from breathing too hard. And then suddenly, there was light ahead. Natural light, warm and familiar. I burst through the trees and stumbled back into the campground, falling to my knees in the gravel. The world snapped back into ordinary sound. Birds, wind, the hum of a generator somewhere. I looked behind me. Just trees. No path, no figure, no sound but my own ragged breathing. That night, I sat inside the van with every light on. June still wouldn't come near me. She'd moved to the far edge of the lot, whining softly, her eyes fixed on me, as if I were something she didn't recognize. When I tried to call her, she barked. Not the warning bark, but the desperate kind that says, "Stay away." I didn't sleep. I just watched my reflection in the dark glass of the windshield again and again, waiting for it to lag, and every time it did. Just by a breath. Just enough to make me want to look away. At some point near dawn, I saw movement outside the van, a silhouette by the tree line, tall and still. I thought it was another camper at first, maybe Harper, but when I blinked, it was gone. And yet the condensation on the window, it had the faint outline of a handprint on the inside. By morning, I'd made up my mind to leave. Marla didn't look surprised when I told her. She just nodded slowly and said, "Some trails aren't meant to be walked twice." Her eyes flicked to the mirror behind the counter as she said it, like she was checking something there. I loaded up the van, coaxed June inside with treats she didn't touch, and drove until Stillwater Ridge disappeared behind me. I thought I'd feel relief. Instead, I felt untethered, like part of me was still back there, wandering the woods, trying to find its way out. Over the next few days, strange things kept happening. My phone camera wouldn't show my face clearly. It came out blurred, motion-streaked, like the lens couldn't keep up. In rest stop bathrooms, my reflection sometimes smiled a heartbeat too late. Once, I caught it blinking when my eyes were open. And then there were the sounds. At night, parked by empty fields or roadside pull-offs, I'd hear knocking again. 3 steady taps on the side of the van, always from the back door, always after midnight. When I looked, there was never anyone there. June grew worse. She stopped eating, refused to look at me directly. The last night I had her, she whimpered for hours, then bolted out the open door the moment I reached for her leash. I searched all night, calling her name, but I never saw her again. I told myself it was grief, exhaustion, guilt, that the mind can fracture in quiet ways when it's been alone too long. But deep down, I knew what I'd brought back wasn't just fear. It was something that wanted to be me, something patient. And the worst part, it was getting better at pretending. Sometimes in rest stop mirrors or dark glass, I see it, the version that lags behind, watching, learning. And sometimes I wonder, what if the night I ran out of that forest, it made it back first? Weeks passed, or maybe months. I stopped keeping track. Time started folding in on itself, like mornings blending with evenings, miles blending with faces I couldn't quite remember. I stayed mostly to back roads now, avoiding major campgrounds, sticking to rest stops and abandoned lots where I could park the van without questions. I told myself I just needed quiet. But truthfully, I didn't trust myself around people anymore. Every reflection felt like a test I might fail. Some nights, I'd park near lakes, places where the air was still and the water caught the light of the moon like glass. I used to find peace in that, back when the road still felt like freedom. But now, the water just showed me things I didn't want to see. A few times, I'd lean over the surface, and the reflection looking back would be smiling, slow, deliberate, while my mouth stayed still. Once, near Fontana Lake, I dropped my coffee mug into the water by accident. When I reached down to grab it, something caught my wrist. Just pressure. Soft but undeniable, pulling down. I yanked free, heart racing. The surface stilled instantly. The reflection of my face broke apart and reformed, eyes open wider than before. After that, I stopped camping near lakes. I started avoiding mirrors too, taped over the ones in the van with old maps. Used my reflection only when I had to. Gas stations, convenience stores, brief glances in chrome bumpers. But even then, I'd catch small inconsistencies. A delay. A shadow moving the wrong way. Once, while washing my hands in a roadside bathroom, I saw another man behind me in the mirror. Same build, same hair, same clothes. Only when I turned around, the room was empty. You tell yourself it's stress, fatigue, maybe something neurological. That's what I wanted to believe. But there's a point where explanations stop fitting, where the rational mind finally runs out of rope. I kept moving. Tennessee, Kentucky, up through Virginia, always heading north, like the thing inside me wanted colder air. Sometimes I'd dream of the trail, the clearing, the smell of iron and damp moss. I'd wake up in the driver's seat, miles away from where I'd parked. The engine would be warm, the gas a little lower. One morning I found dirt under my nails, black, rich, packed deep like I'd been digging. But there were no footprints near the van, only tire tracks, my own. I started recording voice notes on my phone, trying to document what was happening. But when I played them back, there were gaps, seconds of static, then my voice continuing mid-sentence with words I didn't remember saying. In one recording, I heard two of me talking at once, overlapping by a half beat. "I'm fine," one said. "You're not," the other whispered. I deleted the files, or tried to. They came back the next day, renamed with timestamps that hadn't happened yet. I should have gone home, but home didn't feel real anymore, just a memory that belonged to someone else. My ex-wife, Clara, had moved on. I saw it online one night when I foolishly checked her profile. She looked happy, healthy, grounded, and there I was, a man living out of a van, afraid of his own shadow. Still, I wrote her a letter. Didn't send it, just wrote it. Told her I was sorry for everything. Told her I'd finally learned what it meant to lose yourself. Not metaphorically, but truly. I signed it, folded it, left it on the passenger seat beside me. That night, while I slept, it disappeared. In its place was another piece of paper, blank, except for one line written in my handwriting, "You're almost home." The next morning, I realized where I was heading before I admitted it to myself. Back to Stillwater Ridge. No plan, no reason, just that pull, quiet, constant, like gravity. I drove for hours without stopping, the Appalachian foothills rising again on the horizon. The trees grew denser, the air heavier, familiar. My chest tightened with every mile. June's empty collar hung from the mirror, swaying gently. The hum of the tires became rhythmic, almost like breathing. By the time I saw the weathered sign, Stillwater Ridge RV Park, vacancy, the sun was bleeding out behind the mountains. The world was dipped in that amber blue light that makes everything look like it's holding its breath. The gate was open, the office dark. But there was a figure standing by the same lot I'd parked in before. I thought it was Marla at first, until I got closer. It was me. The other me stood perfectly still, facing the woods, same clothes, same posture, but his skin had that faint shimmer again, like light bending wrong around water. I called out, "Hey!" my voice echoing across the gravel. He turned slowly, and for the first time I saw his eyes clearly. They weren't black or glowing or monstrous. They were mine, but empty, like every emotion had been drained out, leaving only imitation. He raised his hand, a mirror of mine, and pointed toward the trail behind him. I don't remember making the decision to follow. It was like something inside me had already agreed long ago. My feet moved before thought could catch up. I walked past him, toward the narrow mouth of the path. The air smelled exactly the same, iron, moss, damp pine. Behind me, I heard the crunch of gravel as he followed, not close, just enough to let me know he was there. The forest was darker this time, no moonlight. The path seemed shorter but steeper, sloping downward. I walked until the trees opened up into that clearing again, though now it looked smaller, like it had been folding in on itself. In the center, there was a depression in the soil, shallow and damp. My flashlight caught something glinting inside it, a fragment of glass, half buried. When I reached down to brush away the dirt, I froze. It was my windshield, the one I'd replaced months ago after a storm cracked it in Tennessee. The crack still there, the same spiderweb pattern across the corner. I stared, not breathing. The earth shifted under my feet, soft and hollow, like standing on lungs that were still trying to breathe. Behind me, I heard the other me speak. "You shouldn't have left." The voice was calm, almost kind. I turned and saw that he wasn't alone. Shapes stood among the trees now, dozens of them, all faintly glowing, translucent, human outlines that shimmered like heat. And every one of them had a face I recognized, old, worn, distorted reflections of myself. Smiling, waiting. I stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of the depression. My flashlight clattered to the ground, the beam spinning wildly. The air pulsed, a low, humming vibration that made my teeth ache. When I looked up, the nearest shape was crouched beside me. Its mouth opened, and I swear it whispered, "You were never supposed to come back." I ran. Again, branches tearing at my arms, the sound of footsteps, dozens of them, matching my pace, echoing through the trees. But this time, the woods didn't feel like they were chasing me. They felt like they were closing behind me. When I burst out of the tree line, the RV park was gone, just open field, empty, silent, stretching out under a blank gray sky. My van sat in the middle of it, engine running, door open. I climbed inside, shaking, slammed it shut. The windshield was fogged over like someone had been breathing on it from the outside. In the center of the condensation, drawn by a finger, were 3 words: "You came back." I drove until dawn. Didn't stop. Didn't think. When I finally pulled into a rest stop outside Asheville, I cut the engine and just sat there, shaking. The world looked normal again. Sunlight, birds, traffic in the distance. I laughed, half crazed, half relieved. Told myself I'd finally lost it, that it was all in my head. Then I saw it. In the side mirror, my reflection blinked, a perfect mirror image. But when I looked away, I caught movement in the corner of my eye. The mirror version of me hadn't stopped looking. It was still smiling. Now I keep driving, always west, never stopping long enough for the world to catch up. Some nights I see the trail in my dreams, the clearing, the smell, the figure that waits there. And every morning I check the mirrors, testing the lag. Some days it's almost gone. Other days it's worse, like the reflection's learning. And sometimes when I wake up in the van, I can't tell if I'm looking out the window or looking in. Maybe that's the price for walking a path that was never meant for you. Some trails lead through the woods, others lead straight through yourself, and you never come back quite the same. So if you ever find yourself camping out near the Appalachian foothills and someone tells you not to take the trail behind the RV park, don't ask why. Don't go looking for answers. Just listen to your instincts, to your dog, to that little voice in your chest that still believes in warnings. Because sometimes the forest doesn't keep you. It just sends something else in your place. And if you look close enough at your reflection the next morning, you'll know which one made it back. They say silence out here can drive a man mad. I never believed that until I learned what my own voice could do to me. My name's Earl Maddox. I'm 68 years old, retired long-haul trucker, 43 years on the road, most of it running east to west, I-40 to I-70, from Charlotte to Sacramento and back again. I used to think I'd die in the cab of my rig, diesel fumes in my lungs, the hum of the highway for a heartbeat. But life slows down whether you're ready or not. The knees give out, the back locks up, and the world you once knew becomes a static hum on a frequency you can't quite reach anymore. That's what led me here, boondocking alone in my old Winnebago Brave, parked just off the Blue Ridge Parkway near Craggy Gardens, about 30 miles north of Asheville. I wasn't chasing adventure. I was chasing quiet, maybe trying to prove I could still do solitude without falling apart. The spot was perfect, or so it seemed. No hookups, no neighbors, just the sound of wind moving through spruce and fir like surf you can't see. I'd been here before, back in the mid-90s, driving a reefer truck out of Knoxville. I remembered a turnout with a view of the ridge lines fading like layers of smoke. When I found it again, I felt something like relief, like I'd parked inside a memory that hadn't forgotten me yet. Nights come early in October. By 6, the mountains were already swallowing the light. I'd make coffee on the propane stove, sit by the CB radio, and listen. Old habit. Every trucker who spent enough time on the road knows that voice, the crackle, the hiss, the half-heard chatter that made you feel less alone at 2 a.m. when you were 2 states from home. I kept the radio on channel 19, same as always. Most nights it was dead air, maybe a faint echo of someone's signal bouncing off the mountains, but I liked it. The static sounded alive in a way the silence didn't. The first few days were fine. I hiked, cooked simple meals, read a paperback I'd picked up at a truck stop. My body was slow, but my mind still had that restless hum. Sometimes I'd talk to myself just to break the monotony. I'd narrate what I was doing like an old CB routine. Breaker 19, this is Roadman, I'd mutter, pretending someone out there could hear. Got a clear sky and a pot of coffee on. It was harmless, just noise in the quiet. Until the night I got a reply. It was around 9, maybe later. The woods were heavy that night, the kind of dark that swallows your reflection in the RV window. I had the radio on low volume just enough to catch a flicker of static. I'd been drifting off in the passenger seat when the channel clicked. Roadman, a voice said. Soft. Crackled. But clear enough. My eyes opened. The hairs on my arms prickled. Nobody'd called me that in over 20 years. I leaned closer, adjusting the dial. Say again. Static, then silence. I waited a minute, maybe 2. Nothing. Probably a coincidence, I told myself. Could have been some kid messing around with an old handle he heard somewhere. CB culture's half nostalgia now anyway. Guys out here pretending to be truckers for fun. I chuckled, turned the volume down, and went to bed. But I couldn't sleep. Every time I shut my eyes, I heard that voice again. Flat, measured, too calm. Not playful. Not curious. Just knowing. I tried to reason it out. Sound bounces weird in the mountains. Signals skip off layers of air, hit places they shouldn't. I'd heard truckers in Kentucky while driving through Georgia, but deep down, something itched at me. The tone of that voice. It wasn't calling to me. It was calling for me. Morning made everything smaller. The mist burned off, and I could laugh at myself again. Fear never survives daylight. I went for a walk down to the overlook, the air thin and sharp with pine. From up there, you could see the layers of ridges rolling like waves, blue on blue on blue. That's why they call it the Blue Ridge, I thought. Each ridge bluer than the last until it fades into nothing. Beautiful, sure, but there's something lonely about beauty when you're the only one there to see it. I told myself I'd stay another night, maybe 2. Then I'd head toward Cherokee, maybe camp closer to civilization. But that night came colder, quieter. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I turned the CB back on around 8. The same soft hiss filled the cabin. I made coffee, listened for chatter. A few truckers down on I-26 were swapping weather updates. Some ham operator testing his range, then quiet again. And then, just as I reached to switch it off, Roadman, the voice said again. Only this time I heard the rest. Don't leave the RV tonight. The mug slipped in my hand and hit the counter. Hot coffee spilled across the linoleum. I stared at the radio like it had just spoken a prophecy. The voice was older now, or maybe tired, but it was mine. The same rasp at the end of a sentence, the same pause between words. I knew it like I knew the smell of diesel on my hands. I sat there frozen, trying to listen past the blood rushing in my ears. Who is this? I asked. My throat was dry. No response. Just static, like breathing between storms. I shut the radio off, sat in the dark, and listened to the silence pressing against the glass. No footsteps, no branches snapping, no sign of anything human. Just the hum of the RV's old refrigerator and my pulse refusing to calm down. I told myself it was memory playing tricks. Maybe I'd nodded off and half dreamed it. The brain's good at fabricating voices when it's lonely enough. 40 years of truck stops, caffeine, and CB chatter, I'd stored enough noise in my head to replay it forever. Still, I couldn't shake it, because I hadn't used that handle, Roadman, since the night of the accident. I never talk about that night, but the brain keeps its own radio and it doesn't care if you want to tune in or not. Back in '03, I was hauling out of Roanoke, heading west on a snow-slick night. Fatigue had set in hard, and I ignored it, same as always. You learn to trust momentum. You tell yourself that stopping is weakness. Somewhere near Fancy Gap, a young driver in a pickup lost control on the grade. I hit the brakes, but the rig jackknifed. He didn't make it. They said it wasn't my fault. But I replayed it every night since. The sound of metal folding, the scream of the horn, and then silence. After that, I stopped answering the CB. Stopped talking to anyone, really. Retired early, sold the truck, bought the Winnebago thinking maybe I could make peace with the road by living on it one last time. I thought solitude might be mercy. Turns out it's just another kind of noise. That night, I didn't leave the RV. I locked the door, checked the windows twice, and sat by the radio staring at the dial like it was a wound. I waited for the voice again, but it didn't come. Only static, soft and endless, like breathing through a wall. Around midnight, I started hearing another sound, faint, rhythmic, outside, like someone tapping metal. Tap, tap, pause, tap. I killed the lights, crouched by the window, peering through the curtains. The woods were still, the moon low. The sound kept going, steady, deliberate. It was coming from the rear bumper. The tapping stopped the moment I stepped closer to the window, like it knew I was listening. For a long time, I didn't move, just crouched there, breathing through my teeth, the curtain edge trembling between my fingers. The forest outside looked the same as always, motionless, indifferent. But something about the silence had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It felt attentive. I told myself it was an animal, a raccoon, maybe a branch knocking in the wind. But wind has a rhythm. It swells, fades, wanders. This sound had intention. I sat back down, my knees aching from the cold vinyl floor. The coffee stain from earlier had dried into a brown smear on the counter. My reflection in the window looked older than I remembered, eyes hollow, skin drawn tight under the dim light. I reached for the CB mic without thinking, thumb hovering over the transmit button. "Breaker 19, I whispered. "Anybody out there tonight?" Static. A soft hiss. Then nothing. I almost laughed at myself. 68 years old, talking to ghosts on a radio that probably hadn't reached another human in 50 miles. My heart was still thudding like it thought we were back on the highway. I turned the radio off again. Silence. That heavy, endless silence. When I finally opened the door, the cold hit me like a slap. The mountain air had teeth. The flashlight beam caught the fog drifting low and wrapping around the RV like breath. I stepped out barefoot, the gravel biting into my soles. The back bumper was clean, no tracks, no claw marks, just a faint scuff in the dust like something had brushed past. I crouched down, running my hand along the metal. It was still warm from the generator. That's when I noticed it, the faintest whiff of burnt coffee, not from the RV, from outside. For some reason, that chilled me more than the tapping ever could. I turned the light toward the trees. The beam dissolved in the mist. Branches twisted in the dark, shapes half-formed. Somewhere far down the slope, a branch cracked. I didn't stay to see what it was. I went back inside, locked the door again, and sat behind the wheel, gripping it like I was waiting for a green light that would never come. The next morning, the world looked harmless again. Sunlight poured through the fog, turning the dew into silver dust. It should have been beautiful, but everything felt off balance. The silence wasn't restful anymore. It was fragile, like a pause waiting to break. I decided to pack up and leave. That voice, that sound, it had gotten under my skin. I told myself I'd head toward Asheville, maybe park near a diner, get some real conversation and coffee that didn't taste like metal. But when I turned the ignition, the engine gave a weak cough and died. Battery was fine. Fuel half full. Everything should have worked. I tried again, nothing but a hollow click. It was a familiar sound, too familiar. It hit me that I'd heard that same hollow click 20 years ago, the night after the accident, when I tried to drive away from the wreck site and my rig refused to start. It wasn't mechanical, it was psychological. My body remembered before my mind did. The same sound, the same weight in my chest. I sat there, motionless, listening to my own pulse tick like an engine trying to turn over. And then, faint and sharp through the static, the CB crackled back to life. "Roadman," the voice said again. I didn't even turn toward it this time. I just stared out the windshield, watching the mist roll up the slope like smoke. "You shouldn't be out here," the voice said. I swallowed. My throat felt like sandpaper. "Who are you?" The reply came slow, distorted, like an old recording worn thin. "I'm you," it said, "before you stopped listening." For a long time, I didn't speak. The rational part of my brain started listing possibilities. Radio interference, atmospheric reflection, maybe some trucker picking up on a story I'd once told over the airwaves. But none of it explained the way it said certain words. The rhythm, the pauses, my own hesitation echoing back. The first time I ever said, "before you stop listening," was during my deposition after the crash. The investigator had asked what went wrong, and I'd told him, I stopped listening to the road, to my gut, to the warning signs. No one else had ever heard that sentence. I turned the volume knob down halfway, trying to steady my breathing. "If you're me," I said, "then what do you want?" The static hummed, soft as wind in pine needles. Then the voice answered, "To make sure you don't do it again." That's when something shifted inside me. Because for the first time since I parked on that mountain, I realized what this was really about. It wasn't about ghosts. It wasn't about voices. It was about the part of me that never stopped replaying that night. The guilt that had festered so long it learned to speak my language. The fog thickened outside until I couldn't see more than 10 feet. I sat there with the engine dead, the CB hissing quietly beside me, and felt the mountain press against the RV like a held breath. I started thinking about all the miles I'd driven, how every truck stop had the same soundscape, hum of engines, low conversation, that hollow CB chatter cutting through the noise. Out here, the quiet had become its own kind of highway, endless, empty, and full of echoes. The radio clicked again. "Do you remember what you saw?" My hands went cold. What I saw where? At Fancy Gap. That name hit like a blow. I hadn't said it out loud in 20 years. I stared at the mic, unable to reach for it. The static filled the space where my denial used to live. "You looked at the mirror," it said. "You saw your own headlights." That didn't make sense, except it did. Because the truth I'd buried so deep it rotted, was that I'd fallen asleep that night before the crash. The truck drifted over the center line. The pickup didn't lose control first. I did. All those years convincing myself otherwise. All those nights replaying the sound of metal and snow. My brain had been talking to me ever since, but I'd stopped listening. Now, in the stillness of a mountain that remembered everything, I finally heard it again. I turned the radio off. The silence felt different this time, like forgiveness trying to breathe through the static. But then came that tapping again. Not at the bumper this time. At the door. 3 slow knocks. Metal on metal. I froze. Every nerve screamed to move, to check, to do something, but my body wouldn't obey. I just sat there, staring at the handle, half expecting it to turn. The knocks came again, slower, closer. And then a voice, not through the CB this time, but outside, muffled and low. "Earl," it said. My name. Spoken in a voice I hadn't heard since the night of the accident. The young man's voice. The one who died. Except I knew it wasn't real. It couldn't be. The mind is cruel, but it's predictable. It builds what you can't face. I gripped the steering wheel again, holding on like it could anchor me to what was left of reason. "You're not there," I whispered. "You're not real." Outside, the mist pressed closer to the glass. For a second, I thought I saw a reflection move that wasn't mine. Then everything went quiet. No tapping, no voice. Just the slow hum of blood in my ears and the faint click of the CB cooling down beside me. I didn't sleep that night. I just waited for daylight, staring at the window, afraid that if I blinked too long, I'd start seeing the past in it again. When morning came, the fog lifted and the engine started on the first try. I drove down the mountain without looking back, the radio off, the silence following me all the way down. But even as I reached the first stretch of open highway, I couldn't shake one sound. That click. That hollow, perfect click. Because when I turned the key, I realized something that made my stomach drop. The engine had made that same sound before it started, like hesitation. Like the RV itself wasn't sure if it wanted to wake up. And under it, just for a second, I heard the faintest whisper through the speakers. Don't leave the RV tonight. The voice lingered in my mind long after it faded from the speakers, like an echo that refused to dissolve. I kept driving south along the parkway, hands locked on the wheel, eyes fixed on the double yellow lines winding through fog and forest. Every curve looked the same mist, the same hollow quiet after each turn. It felt like I was looping through the same stretch of road over and over. The way a dream tricks you into thinking you're getting somewhere when you're not. By noon, the fog began to thin, and I saw a small pull-off near an overlook, one of those scenic stops tourists use for photos in summer. I pulled in and killed the engine. The sudden stillness made my ears ring. I sat there for a long time, staring at the horizon. Ridge after ridge rolled into the distance, each one a different shade of blue, fading to ash at the edges. I should have felt free, but all I felt was the weight of something unfinished pressing on my chest. Because deep down, I knew the truth. You can drive all you want, but guilt has better mileage. I tried to distract myself with small routines, checking tire pressure, making coffee, cleaning the windshield, old trucker habits, the motions of control. But every time I turned on the radio, the silence inside it felt expectant, like it was waiting for me to admit something. That's the thing about being alone too long. The mind doesn't stop talking, it just changes frequencies. I decided to spend one last night out before heading home for good. I parked a little farther off the main road, found a flat patch near a clearing, and leveled the RV. It was early evening, the light gone gold and thin through the trees. Crickets started tuning up. I told myself this would be my last campfire as a traveler. I'd make peace with the quiet. Sit with it. See if I could find something like forgiveness in it. But peace isn't something you find. It's something you stop running from. By dark, the fire was low. I sat with a mug in my hand, listening to the wind drag through the treetops. For a while, I thought I heard a voice in it, but it wasn't the CB this time. It was softer, a memory trying to speak through the static of thought. It took me back to the night of the crash again. The blizzard, the spinning headlights. The boy's face, not angry, not even afraid, just surprised, like he'd seen me coming but couldn't believe it. I'd told the investigators he came out of nowhere, that there was nothing I could do. But what really happened was simpler, smaller, and worse. I'd blinked too long. That's all. Just 1 second too long. And for 20 years, I let that second define me. The mountains were quiet now, the kind of quiet that feels like it's waiting for confession. So I spoke, not into the CB, not into the fire, just into the air. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice cracked like old paint. "I should have stopped. I should have stayed." The words sounded strange, like they'd been sitting too long in a locked drawer. But the moment they left my mouth, something inside me eased. Just slightly, like a knot starting to give. And then, as if the mountain had been holding its breath this whole time, the CB came to life again. "Roadman." The voice was softer now, almost gentle. "You finally heard me." I didn't flinch this time. I just looked at the radio. It was glowing faintly on the dash, the light flickering like a candle in a storm. "I heard you," I said quietly. "But you're not real." "No," it said, "but you are." That stopped me cold. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, listening. The voice crackled between bursts of static as though distance was trying to tear it apart. "You've been running the same road too long," it said. "Every mile, every silence, every night parked alone, it's the same loop. You built it yourself." "I know," I said. "I just don't know how to stop it." "You just did." And then, nothing. The light on the radio dimmed and went out. I sat there a long time after that, staring at the dead radio. The fire had gone to embers, and the trees looked like black ribs against the night sky. I waited for fear, for that familiar pulse of panic that usually followed these moments of quiet. But instead, there was something else. Stillness. Not the uneasy kind that makes you check over your shoulder. The kind that just is. For the first time since I'd parked in those mountains, I wasn't afraid of the silence. Because I finally understood it wasn't an enemy. It was the echo of everything I'd refused to face. At dawn, I packed up camp. The air smelled clean and sharp, the kind of air that burns when you breathe too deep. The sun hadn't cleared the ridges yet, but the light was coming. You could feel it, gold seeping into the blue. I turned the key. The engine started smooth this time. No hesitation. As I eased onto the parkway, I looked once in the rearview mirror. The fog was thinning, peeling away from the trees. The fire pit I'd left behind was still smoking faintly, a thin trail spiraling upward until it vanished into the light. I thought about that voice again, the way it said you just did, and for the first time in years, I didn't argue with it. The drive down the mountain felt different. The road wasn't endless anymore. It had shape, direction. I rolled the window halfway down and let the air in, cool and wild. Halfway through a bend near milepost 370, the CB crackled softly again. Just static at first, soft, harmless. I almost turned it off, but something stopped me. A faint click, then a whisper. Breaker 19. The voice wasn't mine this time. Younger, unsure. Anybody got a copy? A rookie trucker, maybe. Someone starting his first long haul. I reached for the mic, thumb resting on the button. The highway stretched out ahead, ribbon of gold through blue hills. I thought about all the nights I'd ignored that call, all the times I could have answered. This time I pressed the button. Copy that, I said. Go ahead, driver. Static. Then a laugh, relieved, real, human. And in that moment, I realized I hadn't just heard a voice. I'd rejoined one. The mountains eventually gave way to low country, sunlight washing the mist off my windshield. I stopped at a diner near Brevard, the kind with coffee that tastes like tin and eggs that taste like memory. Sat at the counter, nodded to a couple of hikers, and felt the weight of ordinary life again, the small noise of people simply existing. I didn't talk much, didn't need to. Sometimes the best kind of healing is the kind that doesn't announce itself. It just hums quietly under the noise, steady as a good engine. Before I left, I looked out the window toward the highway. In the glass, I caught my reflection. Not the tired old man I expected, but something steadier. Still road-worn, still scarred, but not lost. For 20 years, I thought silence was punishment. Now I know it was an invitation. Sometimes the signal you're waiting for isn't coming from out there. It's been trying to reach you from inside all along. That night, I parked at a small campground near a creek, hooked up the power, set a chair outside, listened to the hum of other RVs, soft laughter, radios, life in motion. I didn't turn mine on, didn't need to. The mountains loomed quiet and dark beyond the tree line, and I felt something like gratitude, not for the road or the solitude or even survival, but for the fact that the silence had finally answered. And for once, I'd listened. I always thought fear was something you could reason with, that if you had enough logic, enough common sense, you could talk yourself out of it. But fear isn't a debate. It's a slow-moving fog that seeps in when your eyes are tired and your gut starts to whisper things your mind refuses to hear. My name's Evan Marsh. I'm 39, and that night in the mountains of western North Carolina taught me that not all lights guide you home. It started as one of those late autumn RV trips that were supposed to be about unwinding. My buddy Cal and I had both worked construction together for years, and when the season slowed down, we'd load up his old Volkswagen Westphalia, mustard yellow, squeaky door, curtains that smelled like pine and cigarette smoke, and hit whatever back road pointed us toward quiet. We'd already spent 3 nights drifting along the Blue Ridge, parking at small campgrounds that felt more like forgotten driveways than destinations. I'd always loved that part of America, the Appalachian backbone that seemed to breathe under the fog. The mountains out there don't scream at you like the Rockies. They hum, soft, old, and patient, like they've seen too much to ever be surprised again. That evening, we were somewhere south of Boone, following a narrow two-lane that twisted between thick forest and steep drop-offs. The radio cut in and out, the road signs were faded, and by the time the sun started sliding behind the ridge, the world outside had turned into an ocean of mist. Cal was at the wheel, whistling something tuneless. We hadn't passed another car in at least 40 minutes. "There's supposed to be a state park down this way," he said, leaning toward the windshield. "Guy at the gas station said it's got killer views over the valley." "Yeah, killer views," I muttered. Emphasis on killer. He laughed, that kind of laugh that hides a little tension, and I leaned my head against the glass. Outside, the fog shifted like smoke, and every so often I thought I saw shapes in it. The kind you tell yourself are just trees bending. We found the turnout just after dark. A weathered wooden sign said Tanner Ridge Overlook. There was one other RV there, an old Winnebago, streaked with rust, parked crooked near the railing. "No lights on. Guess we're not the only ones chasing peace," Cal said. We parked a few spaces down, and he went out to stretch. I stayed inside, listening to the tick of the cooling engine. That old van had its own personality, smelled like coffee and dust, made a low hum when it idled like it was purring. I remember the first strange thing wasn't a sound. It was a light. At first, I thought it was someone's campfire down in the valley. A soft orange glow moving slow between the trees. Then there was another one. Then two more, floating, drifting, weaving through the fog below us. "Hey, Cal," I said, pressing my face to the glass. "You see that?" He came around the van, squinting. "Probably ATVs or something?" "Locals." But these weren't headlights. They didn't follow the slope of a road. They moved like they were searching, like lanterns on invisible strings. The air felt colder suddenly, and I pulled my jacket tighter. "What kind of locals go joyriding in the woods at 9 at night?" He grinned. "The kind we don't mess with." We stood there for a while, watching the lights drift across the valley floor. I remember thinking how quiet everything was. No insects, no wind, just the faint pop of our van's cooling metal. The silence had weight to it. It pressed in on my eardrums like standing underwater. Then, from behind us, a voice, gravelly, old, said, "You boys best stay up here tonight." We both turned. A man stood near the Winnebago, wrapped in a flannel coat, holding a flashlight at his side. His beard was gray, his eyes sunk deep. Cal nodded politely. "Evenin'. Beautiful view, huh?" The man didn't smile. "You see 'em lights?" "Yeah," I said. "What are they? Drones or something?" He shook his head slow. "Locals call 'em the Watchers." I tried to laugh it off, but my throat was dry. "The Watchers? Like some ghost story?" The man didn't answer right away. His light flickered across our faces, then toward the valley. "They watch the ones who come too close," he said finally, "and they don't much like being watched back." Then he turned and walked into his RV, the door creaking shut behind him. Cal exhaled hard through his nose. "Man, people out here love their tall tales." "Yeah," I said, but the back of my neck wouldn't unclench. We made dinner, canned chili over the little propane stove, and tried to shake it off. Cal told some story about a job site accident, and I half listened, but my eyes kept drifting to the window. The lights were still there, closer now, moving in slow, deliberate lines. I told myself it was nothing, maybe campers with lanterns, reflections off the fog, but around midnight I woke up to the sound of engines. Not ours, not one, several. Low, steady idling, like a handful of vehicles sitting somewhere below the ridge. I sat up. Cal was snoring, dead asleep. I opened the curtain and peered out. The Winnebago was gone, just tire tracks in the gravel where it had been, and the valley below glowed. Dozens of those orange orbs moving now, in and out of the trees. Then, as I watched, a flicker of silver light, headlights, cutting through the mist. It was faint, but real. A cluster of RVs parked in a clearing down there, just visible when the fog thinned. I could see the gleam of metal, the soft glow of running lights. They were all idling. Engines on, but not a soul moving. I didn't wake Cal right away. I just sat there, heart-knocking, staring at that strange, humming constellation below. Finally, I whispered, "Cal, you need to see this." He groaned, rubbed his eyes, and leaned toward the window. "What the hell?" "Let's check it out," he said after a long pause. I shook my head. No, man, we don't know what that is. Exactly. And I'm not about to drive away thinking we saw some weird lights and ran. Could be a rescue situation. Could be a storm knocked power lines out. Hell, could just be a bunch of folks camping like us. He was already pulling on his boots. I followed reluctantly. I wish I hadn't. The fog swallowed us the second we hit the trailhead. It was thick, like moving through wool. Our flashlights barely cut 10 feet ahead. Every sound felt close. Our boots crunching leaves, our breath echoing off unseen trees. About halfway down, the smell hit me. Gasoline, faint but distinct. You smell that? I whispered. Cal nodded but kept walking. They probably just refueled. But the deeper we went, the stronger it got. A sharp chemical tang mixed with the damp rot of leaves. Then from somewhere ahead, a click. Like a door latch. We froze. Nothing. Just fog and silence. When we stepped into the clearing, I felt it before I saw it. The low hum of engines vibrating through the ground. There were at least 8 RVs arranged in a circle. Different models have different states on the plates. Their engines idled in eerie sync, like a mechanical heartbeat. Every single one had its headlights on low beam. But there wasn't a single person in sight. Cal called out, "Hello?" and his voice vanished into the fog like it'd been swallowed. I walked closer to the nearest RV. The door was ajar. Warm air poured out, smelling faintly of coffee and diesel. On the table inside, 2 mugs sat half full, steam long gone. The driver's seat was empty, keys still in the ignition. The radio crackled softly with static. I turned back toward Cal. "Something's wrong here." He nodded slowly, eyes scanning the fog. "Let's check another one." We moved to the next. Same thing. Engine on, lights glowing, no one there. Jackets hanging by the door, a phone charger plugged in, red light blinking. That's when we heard it. A single low whistle from somewhere deep in the fog. Then silence. Cal's voice dropped. "You hear that?" Before I could answer, the nearest RV's headlights flared bright, blinding us, and then all of them turned off at once. The clearing fell into total darkness. For a second, it felt like body forgot how to breathe. Everything went black. Not the kind of dark you get when you close your eyes, but the kind that feels alive, crawling against your skin. I could still smell the gas, still hear the engines idling somewhere in the fog, but the lights were gone, like someone had cut the world's power switch. Cal whispered, "Evan, don't move," I said. My voice cracked. Then something, maybe a door, maybe metal, clicked somewhere behind us. A sharp, clean sound that carried too far in the silence. We both turned toward it, flashlights shaking in our hands. The beams cut through mist and caught shapes, outlines of RV doors swaying open, curtains fluttering slightly as if a breeze had passed through. But the air was still. Thick. Heavy. "Hello?" Cal called again, a little louder this time. "Anybody here?" Nothing, just that endless hum of engines. And then, one of them turned off. The sound cut out completely, a sudden hole in the noise. Then another went silent. Then another. Each time, the silence grew sharper. I didn't realize I was backing up until my heel hit a log. I nearly fell, grabbing Cal's arm. My flashlight trembled over the circle of vehicles, and for the first time, I noticed something else. Every single RV door was cracked open just enough to see a sliver of darkness inside, all facing inward, toward the center. There was something in that center. At first, I thought it was a shadow, just a darker patch of fog. But when I blinked, it was still there, not moving, not quite a shape I could name. My chest tightened. I could feel my pulse in my gums. Cal raised his light toward it. "What is that?" "Let's go," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He took a step forward instead. "Cal, maybe someone's hurt," he said, and before I could stop him, he was already moving between the RVs. The engines were shutting down one by one, the last few headlights flickering, throwing wild, jerky shadows across the fog. I followed him because I couldn't not. The thought of being alone up there felt worse. The ground was slick, mud mixed with spilled fuel. I could hear the crunch of Cal's boots ahead of me. Then he stopped. "Evan," he said quietly, "it's a fire pit." I came up beside him. He was right. It was an old stone ring, blackened with ash. But what made my stomach twist was what sat in the middle, a pile of things. Clothes, blankets, shoes, burned halfway through. Jesus, Cal muttered. They burned everything. The fog shifted again. Something about the air changed, a faint hiss, almost like static, building at the edge of hearing. I turned my light toward the trees. I thought I saw movement, just a ripple in the mist. Let's go, I said again, louder this time. Cal, we're leaving now. He looked at me, and I could see it, that thin line between curiosity and fear snapping. He nodded. We started back toward the trail, but it didn't feel like the same path. The fog was thicker, the trees closer. The hum of engines came and went like distant thunder. Once or twice, I thought I heard footsteps behind us, slow, deliberate. We didn't talk. Every sound felt too loud. The smell of fuel was fading, replaced by something else, wet earth, metallic like iron. At one point, Cal stopped dead. "You hear that?" he whispered. I listened. A faint rhythm, like tapping on metal, a slow, steady clink, clink, clink echoing through the fog. "It's coming from behind us," I said. "No," he said, "it's everywhere." We picked up the pace. My boots slid on the wet leaves, and once I went down hard, scraping my palm open. I didn't even look at it. I just pushed myself up and kept moving. When we finally reached the van, it was past 2 a.m. The overlook was empty. The old man's Winnebago was still gone. The entire world felt washed out, the fog hanging so thick I could barely see the railing 20 feet away. Cal slammed the door shut behind us and turned the ignition. The van coughed once, twice, then roared to life. Neither of us said a word. We drove, headlights cutting narrow tunnels through the mist. The road wound back down toward the main highway, but the fog followed. Not drifting, not natural. Just there, pressed against the glass like it wanted in. After a few miles, Cal exhaled shakily. "You think that was what? A cult? Some kind of gathering?" I don't know," I said. "But those engines, why leave them running like that?" He shook his head. "Maybe they were planning to come back." "Then where'd they go?" He didn't answer. The road felt longer than before. I kept glancing at the rear view, expecting to see something, maybe a light, maybe nothing, but there was only fog. At one point, the headlights flickered. The dashboard lights dimmed. "Battery's fine," Cal muttered, "just the alternator fighting the grade." But I could see the tension in his jaw, his hands gripping the wheel too tight. We drove another 10 miles before the fog started thinning. Just little gaps at first, patches of open air where the night sky peeked through. I saw stars again. It should have been comforting. It wasn't. Because behind us, somewhere deep in that white sea, a faint orange glow still pulsed. We found a rest stop an hour later. 2 other RVs parked under the sodium lights, a vending machine buzzing near the restroom. Normalcy. I didn't realize how much I'd missed the sound of something man-made and safe. We didn't talk much. Cal sat on the curb, smoking, staring at the asphalt. I washed the dirt off my hands and tried to convince myself we'd imagined half of it, that exhaustion and fog had twisted everything into something it wasn't. But when I came back to the van, Cal was still staring into the dark beyond the lights of the rest area. "They were organized," he said quietly. "The way those RVs were set up, it wasn't random." "Cal, no, listen. Each one faced the center, like a circle, like a ritual or some kind of signal pattern." I didn't answer. I didn't want to think about it. We slept there that night, if you could call it sleep. I kept waking up every hour. Sure, I was hearing engines in the distance. Once, I thought I saw a glow behind the tree line, but when I sat up, it was gone. By morning, the fog had lifted completely. Clear sky, birds, as if nothing had ever happened. We both agreed to head home. No more exploring, no more overlooks, just asphalt and sunlight. It wasn't until we hit the interstate that I realized something. The van's fuel gauge hadn't moved. We'd driven nearly 80 miles since the overlook, and the needle sat right where it had the night before. I told Cal, he glanced down, frowned, tapped the glass. "Maybe it's stuck," he said. Maybe. But somewhere deep down, I knew better. Because when I stepped out at a gas station a few hours later, my boots still smelled faintly of diesel, the same sharp chemical scent that had filled that clearing. And when I looked at the reflection of our van's headlights on the pump's metal surface, For half a second, I swear I saw 3 small orange lights drifting there beside it. We didn't talk much after that. The road home stretched out like an empty ribbon, and for hours, the hum of the tires was the only sound between us. There's something about silence after fear. It doesn't soothe you. It empties you. It's like your mind keeps replaying the moments it can't explain, trying to rewrite them into something that makes sense. That's what the next few days felt like. A silent rewriting. We made it back to Cal's place near Asheville by dusk. His driveway sloped down behind a line of pines, and as the van's engine clicked itself cool, he leaned back in the seat and said, "You gonna tell anyone?" "Tell them what?" I asked. He shrugged. "Exactly." We laughed, but it wasn't real laughter, just the kind you use to fill a space where fear used to be. He went inside, and I drove home alone, thinking maybe once I got back to my small house, the world would feel solid again. But that night, when I closed my eyes, I kept seeing that clearing. The circle of engines, the steam curling off half-finished mugs of coffee, the orange glow bleeding through the fog. It wasn't a nightmare. It was a memory I couldn't stop re-entering. For weeks after, I couldn't shake small details. The smell of fuel, the silence between those engine cutoffs, the way the fog had seemed reactive, almost aware of us. I'd catch myself staring at headlights on the highway, wondering if they were too orange, if they shimmered wrong. I tried to reason it away. Maybe it was some kind of illegal operation, smugglers, poachers, or backwoods mechanics running generators. But that didn't explain the personal things left behind. The coffee mugs, the shoes, the half-burned blankets. One night, I decided to look up Tanner Ridge Overlook online. I expected nothing, maybe a few hiking blogs or park maps. But buried on some local message board from 2016, I found a thread titled, "Anyone else seen the lights?" The first post was short. Orange lights moving through the valley near Tanner Ridge. Thought it was kids with drones, but they stopped moving when I honked my horn. Whole valley went silent. The replies were stranger. A few locals said that they'd seen them too. One said her grandfather used to warn her never to go down the ridge at night. Another claimed the valley used to be an RV park back in the 80s, abandoned after a propane leak killed half a dozen campers. Said the engines had kept running for hours afterward, long after the fire was out. I stared at the screen for a long time. The date of that accident, October 28th. The same night we'd been there. I closed the laptop, but the hum of those engines filled my head again, low and steady. A month later, I went back. I told myself it was to prove something, that I wasn't crazy, that fear hadn't rewritten the memory. I went alone this time, in a rental RV. Cal didn't want to hear about it. He'd stopped answering my calls after the third time I brought it up. The drive was the same. Winding roads, thick trees, the feeling of isolation pressing closer with every mile. By the time I reached the overlook, the sun was already gone, the last of the light sinking behind the ridges like a dying ember. The sign for Tanner Ridge was still there, wood cracked and leaning. The gravel lot was empty. No other vehicles, no sound, but the slow roll of wind through the trees. I parked, cut the engine, and listened. Silence. I waited. An hour passed. The fog started to rise, thin ribbons at first, then heavy curtains. I thought about leaving, but curiosity is a sickness. It disguises itself as courage until it's too late. Then, just like before, I saw it, a faint orange shimmer through the mist, far below in the valley. It wasn't random. The lights moved in deliberate patterns, slow, weaving, circling. And as I watched, I realized something chilling. They were tracing the shape of the same clearing, the same one we'd stood in. A pulse of light blinked once, then twice, then all the others answered like some kind of silent language. I gripped the steering wheel, my chest tight. Every instinct said to go, but I couldn't move. The fog pressed against the windshield until I couldn't see anything beyond the glass. And then the van's dashboard lights flickered. Just once. Then again. I turned the key, but the engine didn't respond. The headlights dimmed to a dull orange glow, the same shade as the lights in the valley. I don't know how long I sat there, trapped between panic and paralysis. I tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. My breath fogged the window, and for a moment I thought I saw movement in it. Not outside, but in the reflection. Shapes behind me, faint outlines in the glass. They weren't people. Not exactly. They looked like silhouettes made of light and smoke, hazy, shifting, impossible to focus on. And then the dashboard clock blinked midnight. The engine roared to life on its own. I slammed it into reverse, gravel flying under the tires, and didn't stop until I hit the main road. When I finally looked back, the overlook was gone. Not hidden, gone. Just a wall of trees and fog. That was 6 months ago. Since then, I've tried to live normal. Go to work, see friends, pretend the world still makes sense. But some nights, when I park the RV in my driveway, I hear it, that low, rhythmic idle. Not from my engine, from somewhere out beyond the tree line. And sometimes, if I wait long enough, I see them again. 3 faint orange lights weaving slow through the fog behind my house. I don't go outside anymore when that happens. I just watch. Because I've realized something. They're not chasing us. They're showing us what happens when we can't stop looking. When curiosity becomes hunger. When fear becomes faith. Maybe those campers down there weren't taken. Maybe they just stayed. Maybe the valley didn't swallow them. Maybe it offered something they couldn't refuse. And maybe every time someone new stops at Tanner Ridge, it offers again. Fear doesn't always roar at you. Sometimes it hums, low and steady, like an engine you think you control. But deep down, it's the one driving you. I still drive sometimes through the same mountains, past the same ridges. The air smells like pine and fuel. The fog rolls in the same soft waves. And I tell myself I'm just another traveler chasing quiet. But the truth is, once you've seen the lights in the valley, you start to understand they were never out there. They were waiting inside you all along.